So to finish up, that second number is the diastolic blood pressure, and that's when the blood pressure drops due to the ventricular relaxation or ventricular diastole. In the example here, that's 70 mm mercury. So this mmHg means millimeters of mercury. That's just a unit of measure for blood pressure. So the optimal blood pressure for adults is below 120 systolic and below 80 diastolic. So high blood pressure or hypertension is a persistent systolic blood pressure over 140 and or a consistent diastolic blood pressure over 90. And what this does is it puts additional stress on the whole cardiovascular system and additional components of the body. It's referred to as a silent killer because often there's no outward symptoms that are displayed for up to years, while the high elevated blood pressure, hypertension, increases the risks of things like heart disease, heart attack, stroke, and other things like vision loss, heart failure, sexual dysfunction, kidney failure or disease. And in our society, unfortunately, we are under often a lot of stress. As students, you guys probably feel it. Homework, housework, work, COVID-19, all kinds of stuff. Sometimes it's hard to stay away from added stressors in our life. But hypertension is often something that kind of sneaks up on people as they get older, which is why it's often referred to as a silent killer. So let's talk now about the movement of the blood through capillaries in the capillary beds. So the main function of the circulatory system is the delivery and exchange between the blood and the cells at the capillary beds, and that means the exchange of gases, dropping off oxygen, picking up carbon dioxide, and other materials, dropping off nutrients like glucose, blood sugar, and picking up wastes, metabolic waste, to be carried off by the bloodstream. So the walls of the capillaries are very thin and leaky in the sense that they allow ease of diffusion of materials out of the capillary beds into the interstitial fluid and then into cells. And cell waste material comes out into the interstitial fluid and then moves across the thin capillary walls into the bloodstream. And another way that is achieved is the blood flow through the capillaries is relatively slow, allowing plenty of time for diffusion of materials to occur. So blood pressure does push fluids out of the capillaries, rich in oxygen and nutrients, and then, but also diffusion as well, also moves those things out, and then diffusion is moving waste materials into the capillaries to be carried away. So blood flow is continuous through most of our vital organs like our brain, heart, kidneys, and liver, but in other parts of the body, the amount of blood supplied varies based on need, local need. So in other sites, right, the blood supply varies as blood is diverted to one region or another, or shunted towards one region versus another based on need, localized need. So what I have here is an image. It's not from your textbook, but it shows the blood supply coming from arterioles into capillary beds. And notice the change in color from red to blue, indicating the delivery of oxygen into the interstitial fluid and into cells and tissues, and then the pickup of carbon dioxide into the bloodstream. So leaving the capillary beds is oxygen poor blood, carbon dioxide rich, which will go through venules, veins, eventually back to the heart. So this is showing blood flow through a capillary bed serving some region of the body. Now down here at the bottom there are little sphincters that close off and could limit the flow of capillaries, of blood through capillaries, and shunt the blood through a main capillary. So basically the capillary beds are not being provided or not being supplied with much blood, so there's minimal delivery of nutrients and oxygen and minimal waste of materials. So the body, depending on localized need, can totally saturate capillary beds or minimize the blood flow through capillary beds, depending on need. So for example, if you're working out, exercising vigorously, your muscles, your skeletal muscles, need a lot of blood. So the capillary beds that are serving the blood vessels are totally saturated with blood, and they look like what we see up here. However, when you're working out, say your digestive system kind of isn't really operating that much, and much of the blood is shunted to bypass the capillaries providing, serving the digestive system. So the digestive system is kind of taking a break. There is still some blood flow, enough to provide just basically the minimal amounts of materials needed. Now later on, if you're eating and not exercising, your skeletal muscles don't need that much blood. So much of the blood flow to the skeletal muscles is minimized or shunted because they're not demanding, they don't need that much oxygen or nutrients at the time. And removal of wastes. But if you're eating, digesting a meal, then the blood supply to the digestive tract, the stomach, the intestines, etc., fills, the capillary beds there fill with blood so that the digestive system is supplied with all the nutrients and carrying away nutrients into the bloodstream as needed. So your body is doing this all the time, diverting blood to regions of need and shunting blood away from areas that don't necessarily need it at that particular time. Okay, so after the exchange of materials between the bloods and the interstitial fluids and the cells, the blood flows from the capillary beds throughout the body into the small venules. They merge into veins, and finally all the veins merge into the two largest veins, the inferior and superior vena cava, which empty their blood into that atrium, the right atrium in the heart. Then that blood is now entered into the right side of the heart, down into the right ventricle that contracts, and then oxygen poor blood is sent into the pulmonary circuit. So this blood return via the veins is assisted in a few ways. Now in the veins, the blood pressure drops to close to zero. So the blood pressure alone is not enough to return the blood all the way back to the heart. If you think of the blood in your legs, that blood has to work its way up, meaning against gravity, if you're sitting or standing, to get all the way to the heart. So the blood pressure is dropped. It's highest right where that left ventricle contracts, and it's highest in the larger arteries, and it drops a bit as we get down towards the arterioles, and it drops really low in the capillaries, and it's very low in the veins all the way back to the heart. So the blood flow needs a help, an assist, to ensure that that blood will make it all the way back to the heart. So there's a couple of mechanisms to help move the blood along through the veins to make sure it returns to the heart. So even against gravity, the blood does manage to get back to the heart, I mean. One reason why is because many of the veins lie within the skeletal muscles, like between skeletal muscles. So when your skeletal muscles contract, like when you're simply walking, they're going to contract. So when the muscles contract, they get thicker, they swell up, right? Think of flexing your arm muscles, they're going to get a little bit bigger, right? Because you're flexing them. So when those skeletal muscles flex, they widen out a little bit, at least, so they squeeze the veins. And then that pushes the blood through the veins, helps push the blood along. Now the veins also have valves, like valves in the heart. And the valves are designed to prevent backflow of blood. So when the veins within the skeletal muscle get squeezed by the skeletal muscles when they contract, that pushes blood along, and the valves in the veins ensure that the blood moves in one direction towards the heart. So this is sometimes referred to as the skeletal muscular pump. And another modification to help the blood move towards the heart is those valves within the veins. All right. So varicose veins, this is when the valves stretch, they get overtaxed, they do enlarge, and the valves weaken, and there's some backflow of blood, and the veins can swell, even visibly so through the skin. Right? And if they're bad enough, there's surgical remedies for that. Okay, let's focus on the blood now, this wonderful liquid. So the adult human has about 5 liters of blood. And by the way, if you don't remember, blood is a liquid or fluid connective tissue. We have about 5 liters of blood. Think of a liter bottle of soda or water. Average human has about 5.2, 5 liters of blood. You know, if you're a really big person, then it's more. If you're a small, petite person, it's going to be less, but 5 liters. About 55% of the volume, just over half, is called blood plasma. So if you take a specimen of blood, whole blood, fresh from a person, put it in a test tube and spin it, centrifuge it rapidly, it will separate into its component parts based on density or thickness, if you will. Towards the bottom, the heavier components are the red blood cells. There's often what's called a little buffy coat, which has the white blood cells and something that are called platelets that we'll talk about. And then the top part is kind of a translucent part, and that's called the plasma. Kind of a yellowish liquid, mostly water, with lots of dissolved things in there. Salts, proteins, and other molecules, like nutrients like glucose, wastes, and hormones. So about 55% of the entire blood volume is this plasma, with all these things in it. Suspended in the plasma are 3 types of cellular elements. The red blood cells. So this is before spinning, okay? So the whole blood volume, the whole blood before separation, before centrifugation or spinning, within the plasma there are red blood cells, RBCs, red blood cells, which are the most numerous of the blood cells, of the cells in blood. The most numerous cells are the red blood cells. There's also white blood cells, which vary in number. And there are platelets, which are basically almost like cell fragments. So these are cellular elements. Okay? Red blood cells, the most abundant, followed by the white blood cells and the platelets. When they're spun, centrifuged, then these components separate out. Okay? So the red blood cells, RBCs, also called erythrocyte, cyte for cell, erythro means red. They're the most numerous type of blood cell element. Each red blood cell, each individual red blood cell, and we have trillions and trillions of them, each one of them has about 250 million molecules of the protein hemoglobin. And that's a protein that has iron in it. The hemoglobin molecule has iron, and hemoglobin molecule is a unique molecule, a unique protein that binds oxygen. So the hemoglobin is the oxygen transporting molecule within the red blood cells. As the red blood cells pass through the capillary beds in our lungs, oxygen binds into the hemoglobin within the red blood cells. So little air pockets, alveoli, in our lungs. You breathe in oxygen-rich air. The oxygen diffuses across the capillary walls, which are really thin, if you remember, and the oxygen diffuses into the red blood cells and is picked up, binds to the hemoglobin. And then that oxygen-rich blood now goes towards the heart and then carbon dioxide goes in the opposite direction, so you can exhale it out.